Hi everyone, I'm Josh, and today on Josh's Bookish Voyage, I'll be giving you my top 10 favorite nonfiction books of 2021. This year I read about 122 books, 120 books, and about a third or fourth of those were nonfiction. I don't remember. You can see a stats video coming up later this month, but a sizable amount. And last year, a lot of my favorites, I split them up into fiction and nonfiction like this year. But last year, if you had asked me, I would have told you that my absolute favorites were probably among my nonfiction. As I said in my top 10 fiction this year. And this year, like, I loved all of these nonfiction, or I really liked them. But I didn't feel, a few of them at least, left a lasting impression as strongly as some of the fiction books I read. And I'm not quite sure why that is. These are all still great books, just not as strong as impressions last year for whatever reason. Without further ado, let's get on to my top 10 list, starting with number 10. And the first one up is going to be 400 Souls, a anthology edited by Max Kendi and Keisha and Blaine. And this was originally devised in 2019, released, I want to say, in 2020 or 2021. And it's basically about the history of African Americans, or black people in America in general, from 1619 to 2019. 400 years of history. And it's basically a series of collections. I don't want to say essays because they're all very different and formatted. Like every essay is structured differently. It's a different way of looking at that period of time and telling that piece of history, each unique from the last. And then each period, like a period maybe 50 years or so, are then surmised by a poem of sorts that basically summarizes what happened in that period. Now, what is constituted as significant or worth discussing in each section of time is up to the writer of that said essay. So you get a large swath of unique perspectives and look back on history in America as it relates to black people. And some of them are more well known than others, but they all worked fairly well. I think what this book did best, what I was most impressed by it by, was its ability to feel like a cohesive story despite the fact that every narrative is so unique and different from the last. That kind of thing I think has a risk of being almost like disjointed because it's like going from different structured, you're getting a different way of looking at things one after the other, and it might be disjointing, but I found it to be actually very well structured together. It flowed very well. This is one that I probably gave 4 to 4.5 stars, and the fact that I didn't have more that impressed me more, I think sort of speaks to why this list wasn't as exciting as it was last year, even if these are great books that I think are worth reading. Up next is another one that I feel like I really liked, but I ask myself, does it really stand up to be the best of the best? And unfortunately, like, it's the best of what I have here and that I read this year, but still I wonder if it's as great as what I felt last year, and that is Becoming by Michelle Obama. And this one I read in conjunction with her husband's first presidential memoir. I liked them both. This one felt more focused. It felt more honest. Barack Obama's one, like, I feel as if he's trying to be honest, but there's still a level, I think, rose-colored glasses he has for himself. And this sort of summarizes Obama's actual term in office, but it also fits into the larger scope of Michelle Obama's life. And I felt more connected to this narrative, especially one coming from basically I don't want to say poverty, but a lower income household, and basically making her way up largely by education. And it was that educational story, the story of using education as a method of reaching higher levels that I connected to largely. I know education is the only way to improve yourself, but it's one that I have pursued, and it was that overarching narrative that I found very compelling in the story, and just the overall sense of feeling as if there's a sense of honesty and connection from her overall. Like, she doesn't feel the need to hide herself because she's not a political figure, or at least she has no desire to be. I'm looking at this, and a lot of these are memoirs or autobiographies of sorts, but they're all of, I think, different themes in the autobiography or memoirs area. For example, like that one was political. This one's also political. It's autobiography by Susan Page, Madam Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, and Lessons of Power. This is an autobiography of Nancy Pelosi. This was the first ever physical arc that I've ever gotten sent to me, and I was so excited by that fact. And I loved the book. The book was well written and well read, in the sense that I listened to the narrator, which was Susan Page herself. She is like the head columnist on the USA Today, and she's I think a fairly well known political correspondent, political commentator on a lot of public network segments, not like as a mainstream, but as a guest of sorts. And this looks at her life, of Nancy Pelosi's life. And as someone who's a big fan of Nancy Pelosi, I really like this. I'm a fan of what she's managed to achieve. She is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but there's a lot there to be respected. And this book largely is a look, an acknowledgement, and just a big sign of like Susan Page is trying to be impartial here, but she clearly has a great deal of respect for Nancy Pelosi because of what she's been able to achieve. Overall, I think the picture is positive, which is sort of, I think, kind of slanted, and I'm okay with that. But I think even if you don't like Nancy Pelosi, reading this book, I feel like regardless of your feelings on Nancy Pelosi, you'll leave it with a better picture of what she's achieved. Even if you don't like what she's achieved, you'll have to at least give her some credit for the fact that she's at least good at what she does, which isn't necessarily a compliment because Mitch McConnell is also good at what he does. It doesn't mean we like what he did. We can respect the fact that he knows what he's doing, or at least isn't manipulating the system. Obviously, I feel like she's less negative, but nevertheless, she's able to accomplish a lot, and this book looks at that. The biggest, I think, negative of this story was that Nancy Pelosi is a very guarded figure, same as, like, say, Hillary Clinton, and so we don't get a good picture of her history. We do get a history of her life, but it feels as if there's a disconnect that we don't have when it comes to politics, because a lot of what's going on here with her history is stuff that Susan Page had to find in history books or, like, public documents, while the rest of it, as we get further along in the political life, becomes more mainstream, so there's more information to garner. She did get a lot of interviews with Nancy Pelosi, but even then, even in politics, she is still guarded. So when there's more public information, it became a more engaging story, in my opinion. I think that's just Susan Page doing her best with the information that's available. Next up is another autobiography, this time about Galileo, Galileo's Daughter, Historical Memoir of Science, Faith, and Love by David Sobel. And this one I liked a lot, actually. It almost impressed me because I think you know someone. Like, I'm a planetary scientist. Of course, I know about Galileo, but this was such a unique and emotional connection to him and to his life. And it uses his daughter as a sort of point of correspondence in places, but really the focus is on Galileo. Galileo's daughter is like a one branch of his life, and we get to see Galileo through her eyes on occasion, but overall, it's really just the history of Galileo, in particular, his fighting with the church, the Catholic Church, and his basically battle with them to try and push his science, but also acknowledge the fact that he's still a Christian. He doesn't mean to push against God. And this book, honestly, it made me think that Galileo, like, he tried to make an argument to why he didn't think he was being evil to go, blasphemous against God, why he felt like he was still supporting God. And this book almost gave me the perception, or actually did give me the perception, that Galileo might have actually believed what he was saying. And the things he was saying was actually pretty dumb. It was like, even I was like, come on, you really believe that? And I honestly kind of believed he did. Don't get me wrong, I mean, he was a very intelligent person. He accomplished a lot in the scientific community, but every person is flawed. We're all human beings, right? And it's interesting to see how even very smart people can likely also still trick themselves when they want to believe something. And that was a really interesting perspective, to understand his science and his relationship to his religion, especially for someone who is, obviously that's such a major part of his life that is often discussed. And I think it's that better idea of how he saw it that I think really made this book really shine. Coupled with the fact that, I almost said Nancy Pelosi, David Sobel, a science journalist, science writer, and she writes really well. This is one of her most popular books. I think I understand why, because this is maybe the third book I've read by her, and it's my favorite. I think the way in which she's able to craft the story is just extremely well done, and it really lends itself to this emotional narrative. Next up, we have, which number is this? Where are we at? 10, 9, 8, 7. So now we're number 6. Number 6, Hattie McDaniel, Black Ambition, White Hollywood. Now, I had a discussion about this with Bree from Lock Petition. This was a phenomenal book. This is written by Jill Watts, who wrote one of my favorite books of last year, The Black Cabinet. And this is basically two things. It's one, a biography of Hattie McDaniel, this actress, this black actress, who was the first one, I think, ever to win an Oscar, and also Hollywood, the history of Hollywood and its relationship to black actors. And it's a look at Hattie McDaniel's life, how she works her way out of poverty, or at least works her way from a very poor family to try and become famous, try to become an actor. She starts off by getting her career by basically pushing back against the racist establishment that in Hollywood at this time. But as she gets bigger roles, she begins to self-justify taking on more racist roles, more caricature roles, like her signature role, I think, which is in Gone with the Wind, as this nanny or this housemaid who is basically this caricature of this whitewashed history of black people's relationship to white people in the South. She continually began to make these excuses of why she felt this was okay, and I get she needed a job. The underlying picture that I got from this, though, was that she was between a rock and a hard place, right? And I think she genuinely did care, and she did her best to internalize that conversation in the same way that I felt like Galileo did. This book really made me feel as if I had a good view into Hattie McDaniel's perception or mind during her life, and a good understanding of how she was trying to frame wanting to have a good career, having good opportunities, with also wanting to help the black community, since she has such a big position and power. But it's also a bigger discussion as well of what is her role, like how much responsibility is on her to change Hollywood. I mean, why is it on this one woman to completely overturn the racist systematic infrastructure that was Hollywood in America during that time and today? And that's a bigger conversation that we had in our discussion about this on our live show, about not just her, but black figures in the past and today, even the vice president, even, who gets attacked for not doing enough as the attorney general of California. There's an intersection there, that conversation of how much responsibility do you have to try and overturn the establishment, especially when your entire career will go away and basically any good you could have done in the future is now never going to happen. And that was just a fascinating discussion into itself as well. And honestly, the more I talk about this, I wonder, is this really not deserved to be higher? But for now, I'm going to stick to it. Number 6, great book. We're really getting into books now that I did absolutely adore and love. Next up, you have to forgive me here, another Susan Page. And that is The Matriarch, Barbara Bush and the Making of American Dynasty. I ask myself, I read this year, honestly, because I'm probably going to be making my favorite authors of 2021. I did that in last year. The rule I have, though, is I have to have read the author at least twice within that year to be able to say that they are a favorite. And even then, they have to be like 4 or 5-star books that I read. And so I read this, and I wanted to talk about Susan Page because she's an underrated author, and I think there's a reason for that just because she's not mainstream. And I really like her writing style, and I like her as a journalist. I respect her and the way she talks about things. And so I approached this book for that reason. And I can't say I had much of an interest in Barbara Bush, but this book, I think its biggest accomplishment was making me care. Making me not just care, but respect this woman. Looking at a completely different political spectrum to Nancy Pelosi now, and this is clear yet again that Susan Page has a great deal of respect for Barbara Bush. At the same time, she does discuss some of the limitations, some of her problems, especially how some of the mistakes she made in her history. At the same time, she tries to give her more credit that she feels like Barbara Bush often does not get for what she's accomplished and what she did during her life as First Lady, and I guess, what do you call it, the Mother Lady? I don't know. She did more good than I think we recognize. There are some things, very few things, that President Bush, the Vice President Bush, actually did that was good, and I think she played a role in that. She played a smaller role in her son's presidency as well, because she tried to stay disconnected, but at the same time, I don't think she was a big fan of the war in Iraq. She did not like how he was handling that, and it was clear there. I also really appreciated this ongoing arc of her relationship with her son, President Bush. There seemed to be a strong connection there, and I really appreciated that. I don't know, I connect that in my own way. And overall, though, this book did the same thing that the last book did. It made me care, and it made me respect her in a new way. And I think if you read this, you'll have a better appreciation for what she did in her life and what she represented, even if she wasn't entirely perfect. There were things that she wasn't good at. She was very much against feminism, largely because she felt like she was being attacked because of the fact that she had a constant battle with her own body image, and because it was a constant ongoing joke that she had, the self-deprecation. And because she was attacked for that, she often, I think, she had an inherent distaste for the feminist movement. I'm not saying that's justification. I'm saying I think reading this book gives a better appreciation for how she got to that perspective. And it's more, I think, sad than anything that her upbringing and her life, where she was at, led her to this position when she shows signs of a somewhat progressive outlook, somewhat progressive perspective on life, and how she could have, I think, made more strides forward if it wasn't for certain aspects of her for life. So number 4 on my best nonfiction books of the year has got to be All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. This is a memoir by a queer black non-binary individual, except when they wrote this book they still identified as a man, and it's about their story growing up as a young queer boy. He is not your traditional idea of what a black man should be, in the sense that he was very feminine and very flamboyant in the things that he did, things that he liked, and it's about that experience of one, accepting who he is and being who he wants to be, but also reckoning with the reality of the hardships of what comes with trying to be queer, especially a queer man. And this book, I think, really connected to me in a lot of ways because of the queerness, because of this question, this identity, this question about their gender, but also it's bigger than that because it really resonates as this bigger perspective that goes way beyond what it's like for me to be a queer man, because of the fact that they are black and non-binary and more feminine than I am. There's a difference being a feminine queer man and a fairly masculine presenting queer man or non-binary individual, because that's often the superficial things that will get you some type of discrimination. Whether I'm a queer man or a queer non-binary person, I can go about my life and nobody will say anything because they can't know that part about me, because it's so easy to judge me on the surface as being exactly what I look like, what they assume me to be based off how I present myself. That experience, not to mention the color of my skin, makes it very different for me than what it is for them. And it's that intersection, it's that mirrors and windows that exist within this book that makes it elevate to this position as number 3 on my list. It's just a matter of recognizing these books that connected me in some ways, each book in their own unique way, and that's what I love about reading, and that's what I love about this book in particular. That was number 4. Excuse me. This was hiding the smaller book that comes after this one. Number 3, now for real, my bad. Number 3 is The Disordered Cosmos, A Journey into Dark Matter, Space, Time, and Dreams Deferred. And now we have 2 books back to back that have to do with gender and race and being queer, and this time science. This book made it so high up because of the fact this is a memoir, but also a science book by a agender woman, as they describe themselves, who is also a black Jewish scientist. And this is a discussion of, one, their science, but also their experience when it comes to their unique gender, queerness, and race within science and society at large. And it's that discussion, that intersection of those ideas that is so expertly handled in this book, and it's what makes it so amazing. This book, when I read it, I thought for sure it'd be the best book of the year that I read, and now it's not quite there, but it's very close. I think part of it is I don't feel quite as strongly as I did when I first read it, but this book included so much of what I love in a book, whether it be science, whether it be discussion of gender, queerness, and race. These all ideas, the intersection of those elevates this book above so many others in such a unique way that it's hard not to recommend it. What's more, there have been a number of books I think have been recommended by this author because they inspired her to write this book. Basically all the books that went in or inspired her in some way in the writing of this book. We felt so inspired. We've taken so many books off that list to try and add them to my TBR because I want to read them, because they either discuss an intersection of these ideas in the same way or different aspects of these ideas. So many different compelling books on that list. I will try to remember to list that below because there are a lot of books that I think really represent what this has in so many different ways that I think will be just as much worth reading probably as this one. Number 2 on this list is going to be a book I read in November, and that is Atul Gawande's Being Mortal. This book made me cry, and it's not an easy feat. Like, I can get close to crying depending on the situation, but this book, it really worked. This is a book, a memoir more than anything, but it's also a story about death and dealing with mortality and the inevitability of death. But the story is told, basically this narrative of how we talk about death, how we accept it, and how we basically deal with people who are getting older and are reaching the end of their lives. And that narrative is had in the form of his experience as a surgeon and his experience with his own father dying and that slow working towards that moment and how they handled it and how that intersecting with his own experiences as a surgeon leads him to have a better appreciation and understanding of mortality and what matters in the end. That's the quote here: medicine and what matters in the end. And there's this sad reality of, as people get older, we tend to dismiss them, we tend to put them in situations that are harmful towards them, or we tend to value life or extension of life more than quality of life. And oftentimes we will push people to do things that will hopefully extend their life, but instead what it will do is it will not only shorten it, it will make it a lower quality of life than it would have been if they had just accepted their fate. And it's not that one is better than the other, it's about making sure we understand and ask a person, what do you value? What do you want from the situation? What do you want in your final years? Do you want to try and live longer, or do you want to just appreciate the quality of life that you have in the moment? And that's the question, the fundamental question that I got from this book that one needs to ask anyone who's dying, whether for yourself or someone else. There's also an idea in here that I really, really liked and really connect to, and that is this idea that as people die, whether they're getting older, they're close to death because they're older, or because they find out they have a terminal illness, there's this sizable, measurable increase in what people value. People's values always shift towards the personal connections we have with friends and loved ones. And that right there is something that I think it's this, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like it's this underlying message of what we need to ask ourselves, what matters in life, and recognize that if we were on the deathbed, if this was the end, what would we really want? And it's that question I think it's important for us not to forget, because it's so easy to lose that. And for me, it's part of why I have such a strong connection to my family and to some of my friends, my very close friends, and why, at least in my family, I feel this need to make sure that I don't grow apart from them. Because especially for me as an academic or going into it, like I moved to Canada from Georgia. No one in my family moves away almost ever. And there's this reality that even after I finish graduating, I'm not going to go home. There's very little chance that's going to happen. I'm going to go wherever a job takes me. But it's this connection, this recognition that connection, I value that connection and the mortality of it and the reality that all these things will come to an end. And that's become especially true, I think, as my grandmother died 2 years ago. Oh God, that's so sad. I'm gonna cry. Fuck. Okay, sorry. Sorry, I was just saying 2 years ago. It was actually a year and a half, but still. Made me appreciate it more. We're done with that. I broke Josh. I'm sorry. Next up, I have here my Library of America edition of Douglas Adams' autobiographies. And I read two of the three of this collection. And the first one was good, but I liked it. Let me tell you like and really like. I did not love it. But it was in the second one. Was it the Bondage and Freedom one, I think is what it's called? My Bondage and My Freedom. I will just put up a cover, because this is obviously has no cover. I was wondering, and I'm still a little curious, like why he wrote 3 memoirs. Because they're all written at different stages in his life. And the second one feels like it's talking about the same thing as the first one, but it also obviously goes to that point and continues on. But at the same time, it feels as if he's doing something different in the second one, and I'm not sure if that's intentional, like in the sense that he had a plan to do this, or he just had a better idea of how he could tell a more compelling, a more enriching story. In the first book, it felt like we were getting a picture of his life. I said this before on my channel, so forgive me if I'm repeating it to you. But it was like the point of the first one was to get it written down, because it needed to be written. People needed to remember this experience, this what it was like, what his experience was as a slave man, escaping it to make it to freedom. But the second one, while that's still there, I think it's more about the humanization of him and his family and other black slaves, other black individuals, whether slaves or free people, but also a better appreciation for the fundamental nature of society, both in the South and the North. It is this exploration, this reflection, discussion on the stark reality of what America is and what it is defined by. It's not just his experience. It's about the people that are there and the infrastructure that exists in slavery and outside of it. And it was that bigger discussion, this bigger connection, this bigger emotional reflection that made this book, well, it's number one. I'm just realizing now this book is number one. Like that, like when I talk about this connection, this emotional connection, and this big reflection on society at that time, and I think till today, it just made it elevate above everything else. Like at the time, I really liked it. I loved it, honestly. But I didn't expect it to stick as strongly as it did. I think that's why it's here now, number one, because of the fact that as much as I loved it, it's really something that I just can't stop thinking about it. In the same way that I talked about my favorite fiction books. I've talked about it a lot. And this too, I brought up somehow, as often as I can, I bring it up because of the fact that it is such a profound book. And what it did well, and it really resonates. And I am a little worried because I can't see how his third book can beat this. But I'm excited to see what it's like, and eventually probably get to his autobiography that was recently published by another person. I'll put the cover up here as well. But that there are my favorite books of 2021. My favorite fiction book. My favorite nonfiction books of 2021. I hope you enjoyed this list. It's been a journey getting through all these. Like I say, I trying to think about what it is I liked about them. It's always wanting to convey it. Like I want you to understand why these books are so good. Because if you can't feel that, then you probably won't want to read them. And I really hope that I've managed to convey those feelings to you, so that maybe you might be more likely to pick them up. Let me know if you've read any of these, or if you might read them now, and just your thoughts in general about my list. Thanks so much for watching. If you made it to the end, oh, I don't know. I can't think of anything relating to Douglas Adams. Just give me an emoji of any sorts. I don't care. Have a great day. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time on Josh's Bookish Voyage.